fact is fiction, and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And good evening, one and all. Welcome to the X Zone. My name is Rob McConnell, and I am your host and your guide as together we cross the time-space continuum to this place that I call the X Zone. It's a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. It's a place where fact is fiction and fiction, well, turns out to be reality. And we come to you Monday through Friday, starting at 8 p.m. right here live and around the world on the Starcom Radio Network. Now, if you'd like to listen to us 24/7, 365, our main website is www.xzoneradiotv.com. On all social media sites, Xzone Radio TV, and you can always send an email to me here in the studio while we're doing the show live by simply addressing your email to onair@xzoneradiotv.com. Now, let's say you're in the middle of the desert and you cannot get an internet connection, if you can't get a cell phone line. But if you see a phone booth, you just go there, drop in a quarter, and you can listen to the X Zone by simply calling 213-401-0080. That's 213-401-0080. My first guest tonight is a good friend of the X Zone. Dr. Don K. Preston is his name. He was a 1975 graduate of the Northside School of Preaching Seminary in Harrison, Arkansas. Don has been in public speaking since the age of 13 and was voted among the JC's Outstanding Young Men of America. And that's going back to 1980. Don's preaching ministry spanned nearly 4 decades in 2 different cities, Shawnee and Ardmore, Oklahoma, and he's worked for 7 years helping to produce a television program for Christian Magazine, which received national recognition in the magazine Christian Today. In 2010, Don received an honorary doctorate degree from Vision International University of Romana, California, and this guy here just has so many credentials. If I was to keep on reading them, you and I would be here until tomorrow morning without even having talked to Don. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring him right on now. And if for further information later on after the show tonight, if you'd like more information about Dr. Don K. Preston, his website is donkpreston.com. And Don, welcome back to the X Zone. Great having you with me, my friend.
Thank you, Rob. It's always an honor to be with you.
Don, I understand that you did one of your debates recently, and I was wondering if you could tell us about it.
Well, actually, that debate got postponed, if you're referring to the debate with Dr. Michael Brown.
Yeah, that's the one.
It is now rescheduled for July the 8th. It will be on YouTube, and it will be carried live. It will be filmed, and it will be archived. I'm very, very excited about that upcoming debate. Dr. Brown is quite an academic. He has taught at Hebrew University. He has taught Hebrew. He's taught Greek. Very, very highly academically qualified gentleman, and a true gentleman. Our first debate that was carried on YouTube, and it's archived there, has had almost 22,000 views, and so lots and lots of interest in it. The interest for this upcoming second debate is very, very high already. So I hope your listeners will be tuned in to that on July 8th. The announcement is on my website, donkpreston.com. It will be posted all over Facebook and different locations. You can look up Dr. Michael Brown. They will be promoting it as well.
So what is the debate going to be based on?
Well, Dr. Brown is what is known as a historic premillennialist, which is not quite the same as the brand of premillennialism that we hear about, for instance, from John Hagee and other popular television evangelists. But nonetheless, He believes that Israel, the Israel that was, quote, restored, unquote, in 1948, remains God's chosen people, God's covenant people, and that the events of 1948 prove that we're in the last days. Those events prove that Israel is God's chosen people, and the end, therefore, could be just at any time. We will be discussing primarily Romans chapter 11, 25 through 27, where Paul says, "And so all Israel shall be saved, for the Redeemer shall come out of Zion." Dr. Brown believes that is yet future. I believe it has already been fulfilled. And we're going to be talking about the concepts of the fullness of the Gentiles that Paul discusses in that text, as well as a term that Jesus used in Luke chapter 21, where he talks about the times of the Gentiles. Dr. Brown believes we're in the time of the Gentiles right now. I don't believe that. So it promises to be, and by the way, this is not some abstract ivory tower kind of discussion. If what Dr. Brown believes, that Israel of modern day, if they remain as God's covenant people, then all this talk that you hear about, America ought to side with her unconditionally, blah, 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 we got to support Israel no matter what, all of that would have some validity. And I hope your listeners understand that American foreign policy, indeed even Canadian foreign policy, and a whole lot of Western foreign policy as a whole, has been guided and continues to be guided by the belief that Israel of today is the Israel of the Old Testament. She remains God's chosen people. Well, as a result of that, America has been the brunt of a great deal of aggression, military aggression. So the implications for saying that the Israel of today is not the Israel of the Old Testament, she is not God's covenant people today, raises all sorts of possibilities. And it's not only theologically important, Rob, it is important for world peace.
With what's going on in the world today, Don, does this relate to the book of Revelations, and are we in the end times?
Well, most Bible prophecy, quote, experts, unquote, believe and claim that we are. Here's the problem, Rob. 2,000 years ago, John was told, as he was given the vision of Revelation, these things must shortly come to pass. Well, if my wife calls me up and says, "Honey, you need to come home," and I say, "Well, I'll be there shortly," she doesn't expect me to wait a whole lot of years to do. And some people respond to that and say, "Well, yeah, but 1,000 years with the Lord, 1,000 is as a day is years." Well, the trouble of it is, when God said those events were near, he wasn't talking to himself. He was talking to man about events to happen in man's world, and he was using the vocabulary of man, and he used the words that man, in talking about events in man's world, communicate genuine imminence. God wasn't using some kind of esoteric, gobbledygook, elastic, plastic communication when he said these things must shortly come to pass. So my position is, in order to properly understand the book of Revelation, we have to find events that were close, near, imminent to John to see the fulfillment, instead of ripping those events out of John's day, trying to apply them by going to the newspaper and engaging in what I call newspaper exegesis. That's not good hermeneutic. Hermeneutic is a big fancy word for the science of interpretation. We don't do any other book that way.
That's true.
I'm simply suggesting that when we come to the Bible, we employ the proper rules of journalism, of hermeneutic, and we ask who, what, when, where, why, and how. And when we do that, all of a sudden it forces us to realize we're reading somebody else's mail when we're reading the Bible. I mean, if I find a letter written by my great-great-great-grandpa to his soon-to-be wife telling her that he was going to come see her real soon, I don't expect that to be coming true in my lifetime.
I can understand that, but let me ask you a question, Don. Let's just do a little bit of a backup here. Why did God, who created everyone and everything, choose Israel to be his chosen people? Why didn't he choose the United Kingdom? Why didn't he choose Russia? Why didn't he choose North America? Why Israel? Great
question, and it's answered in Deuteronomy chapter 7, where you can kind of imagine that the attitude of pride and arrogance at being God's people, even at this extremely early time in Israel's history, but that attitude of arrogance and pride and haughtiness had started to take effect and kind of settle in. And the Lord reminded Israel. He said, "The Lord your God did not choose you because you were greater in number than any other people, because you were actually fewer in number. And the Lord your God did not choose you because you were more righteous than any other people, because you weren't." And I'm giving the good old Oklahoma translation of this, obviously. But he said, "I chose you because I loved Abraham and because Abraham believed in me." So, in other words, God was saying, my choosing of Israel was strictly through grace to manifest my graciousness. It wasn't because of anything good that Israel had done. It wasn't because of her prowess. It wasn't because of her military. It wasn't because of her politics. As a matter of fact, to do with race whatsoever. It had to do with Abraham's faith. And lamentably, Israel, through the centuries, never, ever caught on to that reality of her election being by grace and not based upon race.
Gotcha. So throughout history, the Israel has been the chosen people. Then if God chose Israel as his chosen people, why is Israel in such a turmoil today?
Well, I'm going to say something that some of your listeners are not going to like. I get blasted for this all of the time.
Well, before you say anything, Don, you know that you're never blasted on this show. I appreciate and I admire your honesty.
Well, I appreciate that as well. Look, Rob, the bottom line is the Israel of today is not the Israel of the Old Testament. Let me give you a real quick quote that, and look, anybody can check this out, all right? This is from the Encyclopedia Judaica, 1971 version, under the item, I believe it's the item of Jew, if I'm not mistaken. If I could get my computer to work, it seems to be locked up. But here's the gist of it. Now remember, this is the Encyclopedia Judaica. This is the encyclopedia produced as an official function of, quote, Israel today.
Okay.
And what they say, and my computer finally decided to work, so I'm going to try to find an article real quick so that I do not mess up the quote, so that everyone can know that I'm reading
Juday.
Yeah, Judaica. Here we are. This version, and it was repeated, by the way, in 1986. Quote, "It is a common assumption, and one that sometimes seems to be ineradicable, even in the face of evidence to the contrary, that the Jews of today constitute a race, a homogeneous entity easily recognizable. From the preceding discussion of the origin and early history of the Jews, it should be clear that in the course of their formation as a people and a nation, they had already assimilated a variety of racial strains from people moving into the general area they occupied. This had taken place by interbreeding and then by conversion to Judaism of a considerable number of communities. Thus, the diversity of the racial and genetic attributes of various Jewish colonies of today renders any unified racial classification of them a contradiction in terms. Despite this, many people readily accept the notion that they are a distinct race. This is probably reinforced by the fact that are recognizably different in appearance from the surrounding population. That many cannot be easily identified is overlooked, and the stereotype for some is extended to all, a not uncommon phenomenon, unquote. Volume 3, page 50, 1986 version. This is stunning stuff, Rob. It is the Encyclopedia Judaica saying there is no homogeneous race of Jews existing today. Now,
but
to more specifically address your question.
Right.
Ancient Israel wrongly perceived her role as an exclusive nationalistic entity as being an eternal reality. They thought they would always be God's exclusive people. And unfortunately, modern-day evangelical Christianity is bought into the same error. Instead of realizing God chose a special people, as we've already seen, by grace, to bring the Messiah into the world, and that Messiah would then create a, quote, universal people, inclusive of anyone and everyone who wanted to accept him. Israel was ever and always intended to be a temporary function, not an eternal function as God's exclusive people. And I know somebody will jump up, they always do, and say, no, God said Israel's my chosen people forever. They have the land forever. Well, unfortunately, those who make that argument really don't understand the Hebrew language at all, and they apply to the word forever, perpetual, everlasting, which is from the Hebrew word olam, and it does not mean, inherently it does not mean, unendingly. The Gesenius Hebrew Lexicon says that the Hebrew word olam can mean only until a designated time. So, what God was essentially saying, Israel will be my chosen people until the time chosen to create a new universal people.
So when does that time come, when this new universal race is created, and how will we know when it's that time?
Great question, Rob. And my position is that time came in the first century. Fascinating text in Matthew chapter 13. Jesus is in a crowded house. I mean, the people are just stuffed in there like sardines. And Jesus' mother and his brothers and sisters are coming. They're standing outside, and they want to see him. And somebody says, hey, Jesus, your mother and your brothers and sisters are outside. And, you know, Rob, Jesus very often made statements that to us today, we don't catch the full impact. We don't realize how shocking. We don't realize how revolutionary they were at the time they were stated, in the context in which they were stated. So in this context, in which people say, well, your mother and your brothers and sisters outside, they want to see you, Jesus said, who is my mother, my brother, and my sister? Those who believe in me. These are my brothers and sister. Do what?
Wow.
This was incredible. This was shocking. Stunning is an understatement of all sorts. Jesus was saying that his family would no longer be based upon what the Jews had come to claim, and that is based upon race, not grace. Jesus was saying, no, no, no. My people are going to be the people of grace, just like Abraham, you see. It's going to go to that status, that state, that condition. And all of those who make the claim to be the sons of God based upon race are going to be cast out. There's going to be a new people of God. There's another absolutely incredible text in Acts chapter 3. Okay, here's Peter standing up in the temple, the very center of nationalism for Israel. I mean, it is the venue where Israel gathered. In the temple, there were several inner circles, all right? There was the court of the Gentiles, there was the court of Israel, the court of the women, the court of the priests, etc. Okay, well, between the court of the Gentiles, the court of the nations, and the court of Israel, there was a wall about 3 foot tall. And by the way, archaeologists have found exactly what I'm talking about here. Ever so often on that wall, there was a plaque that read, anyone, any foreigner who goes beyond this wall will bear the responsibility of his own death. So, and by the way, the Romans even allowed him to kill anyone that was not of ethnic Israel who would violate that parameter. So Israel really, really, really relished her position as the, quote, chosen seed. The trouble of it is they had put their confidence in blood and not in grace. So anyway, here's Peter standing in that very temple.
Yeah.
There's the wall out there, you see, separating him from the Gentiles out there. And the irony of what he said, the power of what he said, is, fascinatingly enough, lost on many, many commentaries. He quotes from Moses. Moses said, well, in the last days, God will raise up another prophet just like me. And it shall be that whoever will not listen to that prophet will be utterly cut off from the people. Now,
we're going to have a little bit of Don, stand by. We're going to have a little bit of a cliffhanger. I have to take a break right here. Exonation, Dr. Don K. Preston is our guest. His website, just like his name, donkpreston.com. And I'll be back on the other side of this short break as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, and around the world on the Starcom Radio Network. Don't go away. In the world today, most people want what is called the American dream. They want love, a family, a fancy car, and a nice home in a nice neighborhood. They also want a good job and money to travel to interesting places. Life is great because they have the American dream. But what happens to this dream if they hear they have a devastating illness like lung cancer? The doctor may tell them they need treatment immediately or they will be dead in 6 months. He tells them you need surgery and then you need chemotherapy to get better. When they get home, they think of many unanswered questions. They ask themselves, will I survive when so many of my friends with cancer have died? How will I deal with the pain, hair loss, nausea and vomiting, sore mouth and other side effects of chemotherapy and pain of surgery? Will I be able to keep on working? What will happen to my family? Then they look at the internet and wonder, is there a better way to deal with lung cancer and return to my American dream? Carl Helvey can tell you yes, there is a better way. Carl Helvey is a registered nurse with a doctorate in public health and a 38-year lung cancer survivor. Carl was given 6 months to live when diagnosed, and he refused chemotherapy and surgery. Carl used alternative interventions. Those not only helped him overcome lung cancer, but also to remain cancer-free and healthy for over the past 36 years since recovery. In his book, You Can Beat Cancer Using Alternative Integrative Interventions, Dr. Helvey will tell you his story of using all-natural treatments for lung cancer and continuing to work during his treatment. Free of pain and discomfort, Carl will also share how he remained cancer and disease-free since then without chronic illnesses or prescribed medications. His story is supplemented with chapters by Dr. Bernie Siegel, Dr. Francesco Contreras, and Dr. James Forsyth, alternative integrative physicians, and Dr. Kim Dalzell and Tanya Harder-Pierce, health professionals. All have successfully helped others overcome cancer. Research presented by the alternative physicians on their treatments for lung cancer demonstrate a significantly higher long-term survival rate for lung cancer clients than those obtained by conventional doctors. In addition, their clients were free of or had reduced side effects. You Can Beat Lung Cancer Using Alternative Integrative Interventions by Dr. Carl Helvey is now available at all major book outlets and at www.beatlungcancer.net. That's www.beatlungcancer.net. This information may help you return to the American dream.
Little children aren't the only ones afraid of the dark. Millions of soldiers return from war zones with PTSD, anger, frustration, fear, and loneliness, much of which surfaces during the darkness of the night. You have the chance to change the lives of these American heroes. Songs and Stories for Soldiers.us provides free MP3 players for these men and women. With a list of 3 million songs in 16 different styles, 100,000 audiobooks, and 30,000 old-time radio programs, every veteran can find something to soothe and comfort them at no cost. All our players contain an 8-hour audio program designed to help veterans fall asleep. With 1,500 plus vets now participating, it's our goal to deliver 10,000 audio players this year. Go to our website at songsandstoriesforsoldiers.us. Help us help a veteran make it through the night.
The Alien Cosmic Expo will be held in Brantford, Ontario, June 26, 27, 28, and will feature 24 internationally acclaimed experts and researchers of UFOs, crop circles, alien abductions, and much more in this 3-day 2015 summer Canadian event. Experts in the field of extraterrestrials and alien encounters, out-of-body experiences, past life regression, soul reading, psychic, and mediumship will all be presented with professionalism, integrity, and credibility, making the Alien Cosmic Expo the largest event of its kind in Canada for 2015. The exhibitor hall will feature a spectacular lineup of gifted mediums, psychics, astrologers, channelers, aura photography, healers, as well as books, DVDs, alternative health products, crystals, jewelry, and much more, completing the venue with something for everyone. For all information and to purchase your tickets for the Alien Cosmic Expo, go to www.aliencosmicexpo.com. That's www.aliencosmicexpo.com.
Hi, this is Eric Rawls of Cosmoverse.com, and you're listening to Rob McConnell in the X Zone.
Hi, this is Blade Runner, and you are listening to Canada's #1 paranormal radio show, The X Zone, with Rob McConnell.
Hi, I'm Laura Sabrin of Feast to Fields Organic Vineyards in Jordan, and you're listening to Canada's #1 paranormal radio show, The X Zone, with Rob McConnell.
Hi, my name is Lady Ashley, the White Witch of Niagara-on-the-Lake, and you're listening to Canada's #1 paranormal talk radio show, The X Zone, with Rob McConnell.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
Welcome back, one and all. This is the X Zone, and I am Rob McConnell. We're coming to you from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, and heard around the world on the Starcom radio network. Don't forget, Monday through Friday, from 9 a.m. until 5 p.m. daily, the Ed Till Show. Radio that has never been such a It's a new experience. You get hooked on Ed Till's show. Tomorrow morning, why don't you just dial up Starcom Radio Network? If your city, your town, your village doesn't yet get this growing network, you can listen online at www.starcomradionetwork.com. As you know, Exonation, June 26, 27, 28, the Alien Cosmic Expo is happening in Brantford, Ontario. Now, if you're listening to us in the United States, if you're listening to us in the United Kingdom, all over the world, and you'd really like to go and listen to some of the world's best speakers on the subject of ufology, hypnotism, dowsing, and all the other great venues that are going to be discussed at the Alien Cosmic Expo, no need to worry. That's because Joanne and Heather have arranged for pay-per-view. So no matter where you are on this planet, you can watch these speakers like Stanton T. Friedman, Michael Horn, Dr. Georgina Cannon, the Honorable Paul Hellyer, and that's just scratching the top of the list. If you'd like to find out more about the Alien Cosmic Expo, or if you'd like to find out more about the pay-per-view venue, its costs, and how you can get to be part of this great event no matter where you are on this great planet of ours, just go to www.aliencosmicexpo.com. Dr. Don K. Preston is our guest this hour, www.donkpreston.com. And Don, it's always great having you with us. Sorry we had to take that break. So if you'd like to pick it up.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, what I was sharing with you, you asked such a fantastic question. At what point of time did God create a, quote, universal body that was no longer to be identified by one supposed ethnic group? Mm-hmm. And that happened in the first century. And I was sharing Peter's words in Acts chapter 3, where he quoted Moses. And Moses said the time was coming in which God would raise up another prophet like him. And it said, it shall come to pass that whoever will not hear the words of that prophet shall be utterly cut off out from among the people. Now, the language there of out from among is extremely powerful in the Greek. It means utter destruction. So it's really honestly a threat of destruction, literal destruction. But it's also, it identifies the people. I mean, historically, Israel had always called themselves the people. You find that term in Isaiah, in Jeremiah. You find it throughout the Old Testament. They just simply called themselves the people. Okay. So here, Peter says that Moses said the time was coming in which the identity of the people would be based upon faith, that is, following the great prophet like Moses, which he identifies, of course, as Jesus. So, to put this as simply as possible, Peter was saying, God is creating a new people right in front of your face. The people will now be identified by faith, by their faith in Jesus as Messiah, the Son of the living God. It will no longer be identified by tracing your lineage physically back to Abraham. You know, it's like I said, the Bible writers and Jesus often made statements that we miss the power of them today. But I want to tell you, standing there in that temple, where Peter was standing is relevant to this discussion, Rob.
Really?
He was standing there in the court of Israel. And I can just imagine, he points to the court of the Gentiles. And he's saying, those people, if they follow Jesus, the one I'm telling you about, the one you know about, they will become the people. And if you, standing here in the court of Israel, boasting and bragging that you belong to Abraham, if you don't follow Jesus, you won't be the people. You will be on the outside. I mean, this is really stunning stuff.
Wow. You know, we're living in the year 2015, and one of the biggest threats that is facing every religious philosophy is Islam. When did Islam start its crusade to take over the world as the only religion, Don?
Well, it actually started with Muhammad himself. As soon as Muhammad was able to raise a sufficient numbered army, sufficiently strong, to begin a period of conquest, he set out to conquer the world. I will understand, and I want to make this very clear. I have some friends right here in Ardmore, Oklahoma, who are Muslims.
So do
I know the local
yeah.
imam. Very kind, very gentle man who just castigates the radicals. But let's make no mistake, from the very beginning, now, before Muhammad ever was able to reach a point of military strength, he very much said, we live at peace, we live at peace. But as soon as he gathered an army that he felt was sufficient to start conquering, that's when he started writing that if people did not convert, they were to be killed. They were to have their heads cut off. They are the infidels. If they do not convert, they are to die. And it was not until Muhammad's armies were defeated in military conflict that they submitted and stopped their military conquest. This is the history of those who take the words of the Quran seriously in its passages that speak of conquest through military might. A lot of people tell you Islam means peace. No, it doesn't. It means submission. And so when people say, we have to understand that the Islamic religion means peace intrinsically. No, it really doesn't. It means submission. And again, I do not want to paint the broad brush, because I know there are literally millions of Muslims that would dearly love for the radicals to go away. You know, the differences between the Shiites and the Sunnis has been an ongoing conflict literally for centuries. And even though there have been and continue to be those on both sides of the conflict that say, we're going to kill you, we've got to kill you because you're all heretics and you're infidels, at the same time, there are Sunnis and Shia that would just as soon just live their life and be left alone. Well, okay, let's acknowledge that. Let's also acknowledge the fact that what we are seeing in the world today in ISIS is what has historically been true of the Islamic religion. It has, every time it has reached a point, perhaps not of dominance in a society, but in which they felt like they could make their voices heard and have a profound impact, they start speaking out against the status quo. I'll give you, for instance, right here in the United States, in Minneapolis, just recently, a group of Muslims went to City Hall and demanded that all Christian churches in town take down crosses because they are, quote, objectionable, unquote, to the Islamic religion. Well, Minneapolis is, unfortunately, a stronghold of Islamism in America. They felt like they had reached a point of strength where they could demand that Christian churches take down their crosses because they're objectionable. Well, you know, Christians have been saying, for instance, that the mosque that the Muslims want to build on the site of one of the Twin Towers in New York, that's objectionable. Have you heard the Muslims being willing not to build that? Oh, no, absolutely not. Doesn't matter if it's objectionable to Christians and Jews or not. But when they think they have sufficient numbers, they feel like they can demand that Christians actually take down the symbol of their faith, and that is the cross.
So, is it possible then, Don, that Muhammad himself is the Antichrist?
No. As objectionable as I find the Prophet Muhammad on so many different levels. As objectionable as I find the claim that he is a prophet of God, he is not even foretold in the Bible. He didn't come along for literally hundreds of years after the Bible was completed. His arrival, if you please, falls outside the parameters of what the Bible says of the Antichrist. Paul said in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 that the man of sin was already alive when Paul was writing. Well, you know, if the man of sin was already alive when Paul wrote, I don't think he was still alive 600 years later.
Really?
Yeah.
So here's another question. During the time of the Council of Nicaea, when it was decided what was going to be in the Bible, what was going to be taken out of the Bible, what is your opinion that would change so much if the Bible would not have been unedited? What the major differences would be? What was taken out and why?
Wow. Talk about a complex issue. In order to understand the machinations that were going on around the Nicene Council, as well as the Council of Laodicea, which was, also extremely instrumental in the formation of Christianity as we know it today, I would recommend a book, Rob, by a scholar by the name of Philip Jenkins. And it is entitled Jesus Wars. And the subtitle on it reads, let me see if I can remember this, something like how 4 patriarchs, 3 queens, and something decided what Christians would believe for the next next 1,000 years. It's something like that. I don't remember the exact wording of it. But what Mr. Jenkins does is he chronicles the political intrigue behind it, behind the Nicene Creed, and the formulation of, quote, creedalism as we know it today, of orthodoxy as we know it today, demonstrating that it really was not a matter at the time, really so much as what the Bible was teaching, as it was who's going to be in control. In other words, it was all about politics. There are many questions that are very, very legitimate questions, therefore, about the Bible as we know it. Now, I happen to believe that the canon of Scripture was completed, all of it being written, prior to the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. I believe that there was a knowledge of those acceptable books in the early churches. And the reason I feel like that is because Peter quotes Paul and calls his writings Scripture. And so at a very, very early date, this is in 2 Peter chapter 3, by the way, at a very early date, in the 60s, the apostles understanding that their writings held authoritative position of, quote, Scripture, unquote. Mm-hmm. Now, what happened, and what we know happened in the church over the next 100 years, was the Hellenization of the church. The church was initially Jewish in its origin. It was Jewish in its origin. It was Jewish in its Mecca. Then, with the conversion of the Gentiles, it became increasingly Hellenized, and it lost its roots of understanding the Hebraic worldview, lost its roots of understanding even the authority of Scripture in many, many ways. So it's a broad, and I might add, fascinating study to contemplate the question, do we have today the Scriptures that we're supposed to have? My position is, yes, we do. And by the way, I don't even necessarily depend upon the Nicene Creed for that. I'm more dependent upon the Bible itself and the internal evidence that we have, which tells us that the early writings, the very, very early writings of the apostles, were not only known, but they were widely distributed. Paul wrote very early on that his epistles were to be distributed, copied and distributed to all of the churches. Now, this is this is while Paul's still alive, for crying out loud. And as I mentioned, Peter was already thoroughly familiar with the writings of Paul, and he called them Scripture as early as the 60s. So when people tell us today, well, as late as the 4th century, they didn't even know what books they were going to be accepted. Well, I'm certainly not denying that there was some controversy, for instance, in the Western Church about the book of Revelation, whether or not it ought to even have been accepted into the canon. What I am suggesting, however, they were removed from the original historical context and the original historical setting in which the very first original churches understood and accepted those books as they were supposed to be, and it was that understanding which was later lost due to the Hellenistic influence on the church as it grew generation after generation after generation.
How much editing do you think King Henry VIII did when it came to the Bible? Because wasn't he one of these guys who loved to dabble with the Bible?
Well, certainly so. The wonderful thing about King James is that although most assuredly he wanted to produce a Bible that would justify, his marital dabblings and his severance from the Catholic Church and what have you. There's no question about that historical side of it. At the same time, the really, really good point is that there were sufficient number of scholars with a checks and balances in place among them so that even King James didn't get every single thing that he wanted. In other words, what I'm suggesting is there was enough scholarly integrity in the translation of the King James. Now, make no mistake, the King James has got some translational errors in it. They're due to our misunderstanding of the King James language, and some of it is based upon the fact we have today, Rob, this is such a fascinating study. I'm not a textual critic, okay, by any stretch of the imagination. I've got friends who are textual critics,
right,
however, that I can rely on, that I converse with on a common basis. But we have so many more and so many better Greek manuscripts of the biblical text today than they did in the time of King James, that we can determine with greater certainty today what was closer to the original manuscript than the King James translators could come. They were very limited in the number of excellent manuscripts that they had access to. And a lot of people don't realize that the advances that have made in manuscript discoveries just over the last 100 years, last 200 years, that have just really, really, really transformed our understanding of the original Greek text, and I might add this, have confirmed the accuracy of the translations that we have.
Really?
By and large.
By and large.
By and large.
So, time goes by so fast when you're with me, Don. We've got about another 4 or 5 minutes. Tell me, why are so many people in today's world so hell-bent on believing all these end-time prophecies that a lot of these self-proclaimed prophets and members of quasi-religious philosophies are flogging out there? Why do the people want the world to end?
Well, there's so many answers to that question, Rob, and like you said, boy, time sure passes when you're having fun here. But let me give a few. Number one, I really believe that a lot of people, I would even say most people, are very genuine and sincere in their beliefs, but I really also believe that they're misguided. But secondly, there are certainly people out there who are more than happy to prey on the gullible audience. Harold Camping was, I believe, one of those. How many times did he say, without any doubt whatsoever, the end is near and it's going to be in October, 1984, 19 whatever. And they just made millions and millions. I believe Hal Lindsey is a false prophet, and I believe he knows he's a false prophet. And by the way, I'd be more than happy to publicly debate Hal Lindsey on this very issue as to what of the true meaning of prophecy, but of course he refuses. But be that as it may, Hal Lindsey has made so many false prophecies. Jack Van Impe has made so many false prophecies. John Hagee. Hey, let's not forget, the fourth blood moon is coming up in September of this year, and so far 3 of the 4 blood moons have come and gone, and not one thing that he predicted was going to happen has happened. So what I'm saying is there are people who are willing to prey on the gullibility of others because it makes them rich. And unfortunately, people sometimes don't care what the truth is as long as they get their fair share of money. A third thing, and I really honestly believe this plays a large part with the good people out there, Rob, and that is every one of us are to a certain extent egocentric. That is, we want the story of the Bible to be about us, personally. I can't tell you the number of people that have told me, you mean to tell me the Bible wasn't written directly to me and my generation? And my response has been, well, let's see. Paul wrote Corinthians, and he says, to the church of God at Corinth. Do you live at Corinth? To the assembly of the Lord at Thessalonica. No, we're not in Thessalonica. That doesn't mean we can't learn and benefit and rejoice in the lessons that are there. But what it does mean is, as I said at the very beginning of the program, we're reading somebody else's mail. So when Paul told people living 2,000 years ago, look, people, I know you're being persecuted by the Jews, but when the Lord comes, he's going to give you relief from that persecution, and he's going to turn the table on your persecutors, and he's going to cause them to be the persecuted. And they're going to be cast out of the presence of the Lord. Now, that's a brief summary in the Oklahoma translation of Don Preston, but that's 2 Thessalonians chapter 1. And by the way, Rob, I've written a book explaining all of that. It's entitled In Flaming Fire. It can be found on my website, donkpreston.com. And I really urge everyone to get a copy of that book. It is as much an exercise in hermeneutic as it is exegesis. You know, proper interpretation, drawing out of the text what is there, not reading into it what is not there. And so we have this tendency to want God to be speaking directly to us. It's almost as if, well, okay, if it was written to the Thessalonians, then it doesn't mean anything to me. Well, that's a fallacy. That's a logical fallacy. We have to learn to let the Bible speak to the people to whom it was written.
Don, we have to say so long
take it away from them.
Don, we have to say so long for tonight. I do want to thank you so much for joining us tonight here in the X Zone on the Starcom Radio Network. You'll be back on in the future, my friend, because we have so much more to discuss. Until then, my regards to your wife, and you take care of yourself, Don.
Thank you, Rob. Always a pleasure.
Bye-bye, friend. Exonation, for more information on Don K. Preston, visit his website, donkpreston.com. Now, would you like to communicate with your dead loved ones on the other side? Well, when we come back from this break, we're going to tell you how to do that with my guest, Janice Carlson, here in the X Zone on the Starcom Radio Network. Don't go away.
How would you like to be able to read other people's minds? Well, the next